Fresh air never felt so good for Dr. Umair Ahsan, finally walking free from hotel quarantine after a gruelling 18-day stint. He and his pregnant wife were evacuated from Brisbane's Grand Chancellor last week after 6 people, including a hotel cleaner, tested positive to the highly contagious UK strain of COVID.
I was kind of worried that what will happen, if there is another outbreak in another hotel where we go, and then what we will do again. Do we need to do again another 14 days?
An investigation into how the virus spread is still underway.
How did it get transmitted? Was it in the air conditioning? Was it movement? Was it picking up something? We just don't know those answers yet. The investigation will go through that.
The cleaner and guests who tested positive had all been on level 7 of the hotel.
I think the risk of airborne transmission of COVID is severely underrated. And so in any investigation, it's really important to engage technical specialists like occupational hygienists that are looking at ventilation as a key contributing factor to those outbreaks.
Occupational hygienist Kate Cole specialises in keeping workplaces safe. She's one of more than 30 experts and doctors who signed a letter last week urging the Queensland Government to investigate whether the virus was spread through the air in what's known as airborne transmission or aerosol spread.
When we breathe or we talk or we sing or we shout, we all generate really fine droplets known as aerosols, and they stay in the air for a really long period of time. It's a significant route of transmission between people, so we can't ignore it.
Aerosol spread has been partly blamed for Adelaide's hotel quarantine outbreak in November.
The ventilation in hotel corridors is not particularly good.
An investigation revealed a cleaner and security guard probably caught the virus by simply being in the corridor outside the room of a COVID-infected guest. It was then passed on to another couple when the security guard later sat outside their room.
Until we recognise the importance of aerosol spread and we don't put control measures in place, then we are setting ourselves up for continued failure.
Queensland Health told 7:30 all potential transmission sources, including the air conditioning system, are being considered. But Kate Cole says airflow in and out of rooms and corridors should also be reviewed.
When we talk about droplet transmission, this is what we mean. Really large droplets that fall to the ground in a relatively short distance. But when we talk about aerosol transmission, we're talking about really small aerosols that fill a room or fill an indoor space relatively quickly. And so if you have an enclosed space with really poor airflow, those aerosols are going to fill up that room. When you open the door to that room, they may actually leave and go into that space as well.
Both the Victorian and South Australian governments have recently reviewed and improved ventilation in their hotel quarantine programs. But epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely says using hotels for quarantine is not the best option and needs to be urgently reassessed.
Hotels have been very convenient in this outbreak, in this pandemic, because they were there. However, it's not perfect, it's not textbook quarantine, because you've got close confines with people in narrow corridors passing each other, ventilation systems that may not extract from the room directly outside but actually share some air between spaces. So it's not perfect.
On Friday, Queensland's Premier will push the National Cabinet to consider using alternative facilities like Howard Springs in the Northern Territory or 4-star mining camps like this one in Gladstone. The federal government is already facing calls to step in and set up a national quarantine facility, as 7:30 featured last night.
It's good that the states took their share of getting the job done, but ultimately it's the Prime Minister and the federal government who are constitutionally responsible for quarantine.
The federal government says states and territories are responsible for managing quarantine, but it supports them establishing alternative facilities.
We will need a quarantine facility at least to the second half of this year, and the better it is, the more normal life people living in Australia can have because the virus doesn't leak out as much.
In New South Wales, the Health Minister has already ruled out using regional facilities because it'd be too hard to move the 3,500 staff who work in Sydney's quarantine hotels. Many of the quarantine hotels in Sydney don't have opening windows or balconies. And of those that do, 730 can reveal some are charging quarantine guests hundreds of dollars extra for access to fresh air.
We were told that to have the balcony would cost us $100 per night, which came to an overall charge of $1,400 for the 2 weeks that we would spend in quarantine, and that's what we paid up front.
Radha Govil was already paying $4,000 to quarantine at the Meriton Suites in Sussex Street with her family in November. She and her husband were charged an extra fee because they wanted access to fresh air for their child.
It was explained to me that basically the hotel had a contract with the government which was just to supply the room facility for quarantine, but that the hotel could charge for anything over and above that, for example, for a balcony.
And this is the piece de resistance. Really what my extra $500 was for. This massive deck.
Eliza Kruger paid an extra $500 at the Radisson Blu in Sydney for a tiny balcony. She thinks it's unfair only those who can afford it get access to fresh air.
It's unfair and inconsistent. You don't even get a choice of what hotel you're going to. You don't find out until you're on the bus. You don't know until you get there and you're checking in what's available, all the cost.
New South Wales Police told 730 every effort is made to accommodate the needs of returned travellers, but they confirmed hotels were allowed to charge for any upgrades.
You cannot underestimate the importance of fresh air, and you cannot underestimate the impact of airborne transmission of COVID-19.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.